Guys, the full Broadhead breakdown is here. I am with Bryan from day 6, and we are going to give you a super deep dive into Broadheads. What works, what doesn't, what shape, what size, single bevel, double bevel, bleeders, no bleeders, expandables. We talk about it all. Bryan, I stumbled upon Bryan because I was doing a deep dive into Broadheads, and I heard him talking about Broadheads, and he was basically unpacking everything there is to unpack about Broadheads. And I just realized that we are kindred spirits on a lot of things. After doing the episode, I had no idea just how deeply we were just hitched to the same cart. So guys, it's an incredibly informative podcast. I don't care what broadheads you shoot. I don't care what style you shoot or how you shoot it. I don't care if you shoot it out of a stick bow or a compound. You will learn something about broadheads from Bryan. It's an incredibly good episode. I'm so excited about it. This is an episode that I think, I get a lot of questions about broadheads. If I'm going on this hunt, what should I shoot? If I'm shooting this poundage and this, what should I shoot? This is going to be the episode that will answer all of those questions. So guys, I would highly encourage you to stay tuned in. Something else that I am very excited about. We now have podcast apparel. Check out the hoodie. We now have podcast apparel. It is available on my website, typicalsportsman.com. We've got hats. We've got shirts. We've got Fred Bear camo phone cases. We've got a lot of cool apparel that I'm really excited about. So go check out all the podcast apparel on my website, typicalsportsman.com. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at ScentLock. So guys, let's dive in and learn pretty much everything there is to learn about broadheads.
With over 90 years of innovation, Bear Archery continues pushing toward the goal of founder Fred Bear, making archery accessible for all. Fred believed the history of the bow and arrow were the history of mankind, and everyone should immerse themselves in the outdoor experience. Welcome to the Bear Archery Podcast, where the mission is simple: to hunt, grow, and inspire others.
Guys, I am never going to tell you that you have to be 10% body fat or that you have to be able to run a marathon in order to enjoy hunting. You don't even have to be able to complete a CrossFit workout. However, if I want to be able to hunt for a long time and enjoy the great outdoors and continue to chase wild game, then I have to do some things to remain healthy. Why? Well, because I can't bow hunt when I'm 80, 85 if I don't take care of myself now. Guys, First Form makes some of the best supplements that you will ever find. I got so tired of overpaying for watered down, mediocre supplements just because they were branded for the outdoors. First Form is one of the biggest and best supplement companies in the world. The best news is they care about outdoorsmen and they care about hunters because they are outdoorsmen and they are hunters. So guys, I would highly encourage you to check out First Form. Not just for your professional athletes, not just for the guys who are constantly in the gym working out, not just for the guys who want to get as big and as fit as they possibly can, but for everyday guys who just want to be around to see their kids graduate, for everyday mom and dads who just want to be healthy and live a happy lifestyle and enjoy time with their kids, for the everyday bow hunter that just wants to ensure they do some things to stay healthy and be able to hunt longer. There are some products for everyday health that everybody should be taking, whether you're an athlete or not. So guys, click the link in the description of this episode to start shopping some of my favorite products from First Form. And guys, I would highly encourage you to start doing some things to ensure your future for bow hunting, to ensure that you're able to enjoy the sport that you love so much for a long time. Guys, I would love to help you out. If you have any questions about what I take or why I take it, shoot me an email, thehunting101podcast@gmail.com. I would love to give you some advice on what products would be a good fit for you and to help you reach your goals. So guys, definitely click the link in the description of this episode to start shopping some of my favorite everyday health products from First Form, some of my favorite proteins, vitamins, minerals, electrolytes, some of the favorite products that anybody and everybody should be taking in order to live a happier, healthier lifestyle. But guys, don't hesitate to reach out and ask me any kind of questions. I would love to help you and love to see you live your happiest, healthiest life. All right, Bryan. So before we jump into this, which I'm so excited, man, because I get so many questions on broadheads. What do I shoot and why? What should I shoot if I'm hunting this? Can I shoot the same broadhead from my recurve and my compound? All of those types of questions. So I'm really excited to just dive in and do a deep dive into broadheads, everything broadheads, and make this kind of just the answer to every question you could ever have about broadheads. So before we jump in, give us an introduction to yourself and to Day 6 and kind of how you got started.
Okay. Born and raised on the Gulf Coast, Alabama. Started bow hunting early, killed my first, archery animal around 12. Had the luxury of growing up in a target-rich environment with lots of deer, lots of hogs, such liberal bag limits. It's pretty much year-round hunting, and had the benefit of having a lot of opportunities to get empirical evidence by shooting, just dozens and dozens of deer and hogs a year, and getting to see firsthand what a arrow and broadhead does and what it's supposed to do and what it's not supposed to do. And about 7 years ago, a friend of mine is a buffalo and banteng guide on the Coburg Peninsula in Australia. And he had everybody over there shooting FMJs because they were the heaviest, but realized the kind of the inherent fault of the aluminum carbon arrow, to where it weakens its spine the more you shoot it, so you don't have consistent spine. And then everybody was trying to take aluminum arrows and create their own footings and stuff like that. And so he wanted to just basically build a buffalo arrow out of 100% carbon, small diameter, beefy components. And so he did. And he sent me some, and I started shooting them, and I was like, man, these are the absolute best carbon shafts I've ever stuck my hands on. And at the time, nobody was building, a super heavy micro diameter, heavy wall shaft. I had reached out to multiple arrow companies for years, inquiring about, what about this type of arrow? And nobody, everybody said, nobody's going to buy it. It's too heavy. So I started shooting his, and I know he wouldn't mind me saying this. We're still the closest of friends. He and his wife were just at our place a few weeks ago over here on vacation. So, arrows were phenomenal. The components were kind of rubbish. So I started machining. I started machining my own, or having them machined, my own components the way I wanted them done. And he says, "Man, your components are way better than mine, mate. Let's try to do this together." So we were going to do it together, and he just, he had his hands on a lot of things, and his family they're big farmers, and he just did not have the time to do what it took. And so I bought that business from him, and we designed our own components and patented them. Those are the centric system that we have now. And that's how Day 6 was born. And immediately following, I had already started kind of hybridizing and making my own broadheads years before. And so I thought, well, heck, I can just, turn this from a kind of a one-off deal where I was making 50 broadheads at a time and, start making 5,000 at a time. So that's how our Evo broadheads came around. And so it just kind of, it was just kind of one of those things to where it was not on my radar. And 2 years later, we're full tilt Peterbilt on on day 6, and it's just kind of consumed our lives, you know. And I was in the real estate, you know, a residential building construction business on the Gulf Coast, and it's what I'd always done. My family was in it, and man, it got to a point to where we had to decide quality of bank account or quality of life, and it was a no-brainer for our family. We just said, heck, you know, we've done this long enough. Let's go quality of life. And that's what we did. And then 2 years ago, we decided, you know, our youngest had graduated high school. And I said, do we want to live down here the rest of our life, or do we want to live out west? And we had been renting somewhere in Wyoming, and we just decided we're going to set day 6 up in Wyoming and move out here. And God, it's just been the most incredible blessing I think I've ever experienced. Most rewarding thing
so cool,
I've ever done, between the business and the life change and moving to Wyoming. And it's just overwhelming at times how blessed we feel. So that's kind of the genesis of day 6, you know, and it's been fun.
Well, not to get too far off topic, because I do want to dive into broadheads, but you know, I just tell guys, like, man, if you've got a dream, don't wait. Like, if you've got this idea of what you want your life to look like, take the steps to get it to look like that. And there's not ever going to be a perfect time. Like, dude, when I quit my job to go full-time in the outdoor industry, it was October of 2020. And if you remember 2020, there was no certainty at all in anything. Like, and I had a very stable job, you know, throughout all that. I never had to take a day off. It was never considered, I was always considered essential at my old job. And, you know, healthcare was always provided. Like, there was nothing to worry about in our life. And, you know, I come to my wife and I said, hey, I've got the opportunity to go full-time in the outdoor industry. Pope and Young just called. They want me to be their marketing director. And, you know, with things going on with Bear, there's no better time than now. And she was like, what do you mean there's no better time than now? Like, everything in the world is shut down and you want to quit your job? But it's exactly like you said, man. Now I couldn't dream of having it any other way. I mean, I couldn't dream of going back and not taking that step, man.
Yeah. Well, you know the thing that my wife and I say to each other a lot, and we say to others, is I'll be 51 in a few weeks, and we wish we would have done this at 31. But you know, life seems to get in the way. So my one's, just to make a very succinct message here, my one piece of advice from experience is there's never going to be a good time to do it. If you're waiting for the right time to do it, it ain't coming. It's never going to be a good time. It's got to be a do it or don't. And if you're not committed enough to make a life change like that, when you still think or know it's not a good time, you're not going to be successful. And you've got to just look at it as, what's the worst thing that can happen? You fail? Crap. I mean, I fail every day. So it's not the end of the world. If you do it when you're younger, you have time to recover financially. So, you know, like sometimes I feel like Joe Exotic doing this at 50. You know, I'm never going to financially recover from this. But if you're in your 20s or 30s and you do it, I mean, you got a little bit of runway left. So I'd say let her rip, you know?
Right. Now,
not that we need to expand the hunting industry anymore. I'm just saying any dream in particular. I'm not, and the other caveat to that is Wyoming is closed. I was the last non-resident that let move into the state. So they shut down the state right after I got here. So I'm kidding.
Now I love talking to industry professionals and diving into that sort of thing. However, we're here for a specific task at hand. And I want anybody listening to this, if you call me and say, hey, I got to go on an elk hunt, you know, these mechanicals that I've always shot at whitetails, it ain't going to do the trick. What do I shoot? I want this to be the place you can come and listen to everything and know everything about broadheads. So let me just start by saying we are by no means here to put down or bash any other brand, any other design, any other concept. That's not what we're here to do. You guys know Bear Archery makes broadheads. Bear Archery makes the Razorhead. Bear Archery makes sick broadheads. However, I've listened to Bryan talk about broadheads before, and I've listened to him in depth discuss broadheads. And so I thought him to be the perfect guy to come on. Also, our values align on what we want out of a broadhead. So I just thought that he should come on and we should dive into all things broadheads. Now, we're going to go down this path and you're going to quickly realize that I am no longer for and I'm no longer shooting the Razorhead for two reasons. We'll get into why here later on. But before we dive into all of this, Bryan, as we got on and started discussing, said he had a ton of history with the Razorhead. And again, we're not here to put down the Razorhead. It's a phenomenal head. It's worked for decades. It's killed hundreds of thousands of animals, world records in all places and parts of the world. We're not here to put that broadhead down. I've killed animals with it. It works. So, Bryan, what is your history with the Razorhead? Because day 6, you mentioned, kind of came from testing, trial and error, what works, what doesn't work, what you want out of a head. So where did your history with the Razorhead come from?
Well, to be fair, the Razorhead I'm talking about and the Razorhead you're talking about are two different heads.
Correct.
So I'm talking about a pre-90s. That's 1990s, pre-1990s.
The original Razorhead. The old green Razorheads.
Actually, the original Super Razorheads.
Oh, my bad.
Yep. So I may get this wrong, probably will, but I believe the Razorheads were the two blades and the Super Razorheads had the bleeders that you could change the bleeders out. And so, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, but the heads that I shot were the Bear Super Razorheads, and they had like a very, very thin, solid blue steel bleeder. And when Fred Bear designed that head, he designed it with the thought that the bleeder was sacrificial, that it would disrupt the perfect slit of a two blade in most situations. But should he engage or, and have to breach heavy bone, the bleeder would break away and it would go back to a two blade, which is the most efficient way to penetrate and breach bone. So that was the concept. It was absolutely genius. So way before its time,
that's for sure.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, again, you have a guy that has vast amounts of empirical evidence via shooting the living piss out of animals. I mean, he just stacked them up. And so, I hear what's happened is that all these companies have gone into this science and data and charts and graphs and all of this over the top geeking out on details. And I have an engineering background. I'm not an engineer, but I went to school for, the construction version of it, the redneck version of it. So, I was in the business my entire life. I understand structural integrity. I get it. The thing is that, you can't learn this stuff by theory. It has to be arrows through animals. There's just no substitute for it. And so if today, like when I wanted to release our Evo heads, my thought was to have the convex, outside curving shape like the Razorhead, because that is the strongest shape that you can get for a blade structurally. And it also provides the least amount of resistance. and we'll dive into resistance and all that, I'm sure, later.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really wanted to do was build a non-vented, because that was the one complaint I had. One of the complaints I had with those old razor heads was the vented, and as well as the little tack welded construction. It wasn't very concentric, didn't spin well, but the blade shape was perfect. The ratio was perfect. The breakaway bleeders were perfect. I mean, it was absolutely perfect, other than the way it was built, the materials it was built from. So I wanted to build a solid blade style head like that with a convex blade. I wanted to use the single best high quality steel that you could get. That was very easy to research and determine because you have the knife industry that's been around, 14 forever. So they got it figured out. So what's the holy grail of knife steel? That's what we went and found. And I wanted to do low profile breakaway bleeders. But I knew when we did it, there was no dang way it was going to work, because everybody on YouTube was shooting their broadheads into their mom's basement walls. And that's how they were determining what a good broadhead was, is if it survived shooting the basement wall. And I was like, well, crap, nobody's going to buy in on a breakaway bleeder. So, but what we did do is we placed the bleeder where it should be, which is mid-body of the main blade in front of the ferrule. And then we also made it low profile, low blade angle, just like the main blade. So huge inspiration from the Bear Super Razor Head. And up until about 7 or 8 minutes ago, hell, I didn't even know they didn't make them anymore. I'm still like flabbergasted because it was the best, like, affordable broadhead you could buy. But that's the way things have gone in the hunting industry. Is I've watched everything go towards these trends, towards all this tech and science and geeky stuff, and go away from what works. It just cracks me up. But anyway, I'll digress before I get into a rant. I'm famous for those, so sorry.
I like rants, bro.
I'm
yeah,
trying
and it was
to cool
just
it down.
up until a few years ago. It was just up until a few years, 2 ATAs ago, not this one, but the one before that, they relaunched the Razorhead, came out with the double bevel and the single bevel, and then came out this ATA with the 3-blade. Now, so 2 of the reasons I don't shoot the Razorhead anymore. You guys, I was shooting it. You've heard me talk about those. You've heard me talk about cutthroats, both double bevels that both single bevels that I really enjoyed. Reason I'm not shooting it, I found that I think it's absolutely necessary to have a bleeder, because 2 animals last year I lost because of a perfect slit, no blood, and I mean, it was just rough. And up until those 2 animals last year, I had great success. I absolutely loved the double bevel. I absolutely loved the single bevel up until those 2 animals last year. One was a bear in Idaho with my recurve, made me sick. Great penetration, blew through the bear, but it created a perfect slit, and I couldn't find any blood, and we never recovered the animal, and it stunk. And then the other one was a whitetail last year with my compound, just horrible blood. I saw where the animal died. That wasn't the issue. I found that animal saw where he died. I was just really frustrated with the amount of blood that I found. And then you get up to the animal, and there's 2 perfect slits, one going in, one going out. And I thought, yeah, I've got to do something to make this better. And so I went away from the Razorhead and the cutthroats and started looking a different direction. And I went into a deep dive of broadheads, went into a deep dive of testing, of understanding, of looking at, of digesting podcasts and videos. And that's how I stumbled upon Bryan. So Bryan, let's just talk, 10,000 foot level of broadheads, designs and functionalities of broadheads, and what you have found, for each one of those designs. And then we'll kind of, dive into more specifics on each one.
Well, if you're wanting a 30,000 foot view, what is a broadhead supposed to do? So, broadheads kill by hemorrhage. The best way to get maximum hemorrhage is have the sharpest blade available. you want, regardless of what you're shooting, you want it to be the equivalent of what a razor blade is. That's the type of scalpel sharpness you're looking for. That's what creates hemorrhage and creates maximum blood flow. For me, I want 2 holes. I want an entry and an exit. The exit hole is the drain plug. That's where all the blood flows out. And to me, that's incredibly important for recovering animals. Some people don't buy into that, but, not my pig, not my farm. But so in order to achieve maximum penetration, 2 holes, you need the least amount of resistance. It's really simple stuff. So you want very low drag, low resistance. And the way broadheads and arrows penetrate and what causes them not to penetrate is sidewall friction. And so sidewall friction is, if you've seen houses on like the Gulf Coast or on shorelines to where they're sitting on wooden pilings, or a pier or a boat dock, anything sitting on a wooden piling, people think that piling is driven into the ground and that the flat butt end of that piling sits on something hard. And that's what holds the structure up above it. So if you say like the end of a pencil and you pushed it down the ground, the eraser end, the flat blunt part's what holds it up. That's not how it works. So the way a piling holds any structure up is with sidewall friction. And the density of the soil is what determines what diameter piling and how deep. And what you're trying to do is determine how much surface area of that piling needs to be in contact with that density of dirt to create sidewall friction to hold up a certain amount of weight. That is an arrow. That's what stops an arrow from going through an animal is sidewall friction. Now, you do have impact to where, let's say it hits a leg bone or whatever, and if that broadhead doesn't breach that, you're not getting anywhere. If the broadhead does breach it, but as the arrow's going through, it's creating sidewall friction on the bone. Again, that's what's stopping the arrow. So muscle, bone, sinew, all of that stuff, organs, all that has different densities of sidewall friction that it's going to place on that arrow and that broadhead as it's going through. So what you're trying to do is create the least amount of friction so that arrow will pass completely through and you'll have 2 holes. That's what a broadhead's supposed to do. So, but if you really want a 30,000 foot view about when you hear guys say, I shot an animal, watched him fall, no blood trail, that's a very, very subjective analysis of what's going on. You can't pare it down just to what the broadhead did. Because if you think about it, most guys that have shot enough animals wait until the onside leg is moved forward to shoot that animal, correct? And that exposes more vitals. It gets the scapula out of the way, so on and so forth. So, but what that does is that if you can imagine an animal in layers from left to right, that's what you've got as layers. You've got hide, then you've got, silver skin and meat and cartilage and bone, and you've got organs and diaphragms and all these different things that are creating these layers. So an animal's not a 3D target. So when you shoot through it, you don't have this perfect hole that goes right through and you can look through the hole. What happens is that hole goes through all those layers as it's oriented upon impact. When the animal moves, all that stuff shifts. It all moves. So you don't have like a tunnel through there anymore. And what happens is that which 100%, I am a firm believer, you should try to have the onside leg moving forward. But what happens is a lot of times when you hit an animal and you make a perfect shot up tight, as soon as that animal moves, he closes all that stuff and everything comes back and all of that entry hole closes. Now, the other side of that coin is when the animal's off leg is forward and you come out, and then as it's moving, it's coming back again. So that hole is opening and closing constantly. So it's not like a perfect drain plug. The problem with a straight two blade is in all other aspects, a two blade is superior to everything in my mind as far as maximum penetration, hemorrhage, the whole deal. Where it fails is that it leaves a perfect slit like you alluded to earlier. And that perfect slit is, if it's a super sharp head, it's almost the worst it gets because it's a perfect mirror image from hide to hide, cartilage to cartilage, meat to meat, and it seals right back up. And the only reason that a bleeder is implemented on a two-blade design is to disrupt that slit. There's really no other function. People think it's more surface area, you're creating a bigger hole. Technically you are, but at the end of the day, that's like way down the list of what the bleeder's supposed to do. The bleeder is only there to disrupt that perfect slit. That's why Fred Bear put it on the Super Razor head when he did, because he realized, like bears, for example, bears have very greasy hide. They have very greasy fat content that's hide adjacent. And so it's almost like shooting through a can of axle grease when you shoot bears. And then you've got this super, super dense hide that absorbs all of that fat and grease and stuff that's coming out of those wound channels. So bears are just hard to get a good blood trail on. They're super hard. And on top of that, I will say that most bears are lost because people think they made a great shot, but they really didn't. And most of the time they're too high or too low because bears' hair hangs so far below their chest and their belly that it gives you this false sense of where you hit. It looks like a perfect shot. You may be way low. And they're so black and so uniform, they don't have those discernible, muscle lines and things like ungulates do, that you can say, oh, I'm right behind the crease, or here's the rib. You can't see any of that crap on a bear. So that's where a lot of them are lost. But those types of animals, you don't want a perfect slit. And I've killed a bunch of bears with a two-blade head. But I would much rather shoot a bear with a two-blade style with a larger bleeder. To me, that's the perfect setup for them. So that's what a bleeder is supposed to do. If you were going to design the perfect head, to me, it would be a main blade and a perpendicular bleeder without a ferrule, because you'd have the perfect scenario for maximum cut, and you wouldn't have the sidewall friction and drag of the ferrule. It would just be four blades joined together going right through. The problem with that is you have to transition from the head to the arrow, so you have to have some type of ferrule there to make it work. The other thing that a bleeder will do, as we kind of circle back to my first discussion about sidewall friction, is if you have that other cut, that cross cut for a bleeder, as long as it's just a little bit wider than what the diameter of your arrow is, you've now opened up a larger path and less resistance for that arrow to pass through without sidewall friction. So, I mean, that's kind of the overall view of what a broadhead's supposed to do. If you listen to that rant and you believed everything I said and thought that makes sense and that sounds right, and then you open up a catalog and look at all the broadheads available, you'll see that the majority of broadheads out there don't adhere to that theory. They're totally opposite of all of that. So that's kind of the frustrating part for me, is to watch, all this stuff kind of go away from what a broadhead's supposed to do. Anyway.
The frustrating part for me is the lack of consideration that people give their broadheads. What I mean by that is, at the end of the day, no matter what, I don't care what camo you're wearing. I don't care what bow you're shooting. I don't care what boots you got on or what binoculars you had on or how cool you looked out there or how big the animal you shot at was. At the end of the day, the first thing to contact that animal is a broadhead. The first thing no matter how hard you hunt, no matter where you're hunting at, no matter where the first thing that comes in contact with you from that animal is your broadhead. And the
Good.
only thing, if you're not successful, that comes in contact with that animal is the broadhead and the arrow. I don't care what bow it's coming out of. I don't care if it's a stick bow. I don't care if it's a compound. The only things to come in contact with that animal up until the point you lay hands on it or don't find it is your broadhead and your arrow. But nobody gives consideration to their broadheads. And I think we're finally getting past the the 2010s where everybody thought, oh, they fly like field tips, mechanicals, screw them on and go hunting, and they never shoot them, they never look at them, they never test them, it's supposed to fly like a field tip, so they screw them on and go hunting. I think we're getting past that, but I still don't think we're to the point where people give enough consideration to what's on the end of their arrow, how it flies, the noise it makes downrange, how it penetrates, how it's dispersing the meat as it goes through. I don't think people consider that enough. And so that's why I really wanted you on to talk about these things, because you're right. When you open a catalog from Three Rivers, there's like hundreds of different designs, and people will be like, this looks cool. I mean, I don't know what else to go off of other than what Ranch Fairy has told me, or other than what YouTube has told me to go off of. So because I know you talked pretty in depth about, well, let me ask this first before we get into that. At what point does a bleeder become a 3 and 4 blade? At what point is a bleeder so big? Because you see some people and they say, "Oh, the bleeder blade," and you're like, "That's basically the same size as the main blade." So, at what point does a bleeder become a 4-blade broadhead?
Well, that's a great question because, I let the younger guys at our business talk me into going, offering a 3/4 inch bleeder blade over our standard 1/2 inch. And because, people were thinking larger hole, more blood loss, so on and so forth. And I did it. And honestly, it's almost not even measurable, the difference between the two bleeders. If I'm being completely honest, the difference is just not measurable. When you go, here's the thing. If you can build a 4-blade that, a bleeder large enough that is almost a floor blade, as long as you can keep the blade angle low profile and with very low resistance, as long as you can keep that blade angle slight, that it's not going to affect you that much. What happens is when you start increasing the size of the bleeder or the 4th blade or the third and 4th blade, if you want to, the crosscut, most people, where they place their bleeders, it's an afterthought and it sticks straight out, and it defeats the entire purpose of having a very, low drag blade angle on your main blade. If you put a freaking parachute, perpendicular to it, sticking straight out, under the name of a bleeder. So makes no sense. It's not going to make that big of a difference. Here's the thing though. When you go from, I'd say, a 2-blade with a bleeder to almost like a 4-blade design, what you've done is you've created a wedge. And when you have that much surface area on both sides, and you do unfortunately encounter heavy bone, it's not going to do what a 2-blade style with a very low profile small bleeder will do. It's going to wedge. So we can kind of dive into this if you'd like. So there's some really cool 4-blade and really cool 3-blade heads out there. And I've shot a tractor trailer load of stuff with 3-blade heads. I mean, I've tried it all. What I experienced with the 3-blade heads that actually got the blade angle right, and they're very low profile, 3 and 4 blade styles, is that they almost on dead center rib, like heavy rib impacts, because as you get higher on an animal, even deer, their ribs increase in mass, and then they get smaller and thinner as they get to the bottom. to where as they start getting low, the rib mass is not that critical and its density is not that critical. As you get higher, like if you're shooting down, like a really close shot from a tree stand or something like that, the higher that rib goes, it increases in width, size, density, all of that. So same thing with the leg bones. As you're getting up higher, that leg bone is increasing, and you start getting into the scapula, and the scapula mass starts to increase. What I experienced firsthand, this is not theory, is on these low profile, low blade angle, 3-blade and 4-blade style heads, is that if I had a center mass impact on a heavy rib, high or shoulder or leg bone, that they would almost act as a perfect wedge, and they would disperse the energy so evenly and so perfectly that they would just go right into they would go right in, and it was just like a perfect air brake. And that head would not breach the bone. It would just basically slow itself down at a very equal pace and rate and just slowly bring everything to a halt. And I experienced it a lot, and wasn't smart enough at the time to understand what was happening. And then as I experienced it later in life, I tried some really nice 3-blade heads with built-in center pins and all that when they first came out. They were just super cool, great blade angles and all. But I experienced that wedging, breaking, like slowing down phenomena with bone impacts, as late as 2015, 16 maybe, with that head and those styles. And I don't want to say what they are. I don't ever want to, disparage anybody's product or business. I mean, behind every business is a family and multiple families. And so it's just, not good to cut somebody else's feet off to make yourself look taller. So I really don't want to get into those specifics, but that style for me, that was the downfall to it. You hit them anywhere else, they left fantastic holes. They bled well as long as you could get them sharp. Some of those designs, you basically have to buy half a machine shop to have in your garage to sharpen them. So it kind of defeats the purposes there as well. So when you ask that question, what takes it from a 2-blade and a bleeder to a 4-blade, to me, it's once the bleeder becomes almost commensurate in size to the main blade, that's when it comes a 3 or 4-blade to me. And that's when you get that wedge effect on bone impact. And the 2-blade style, man, if you could just shoot straight 2 blades, you're in the chips. But that perfect slit and lack of blood trail and wounds closing, it's just too much to overlook. So like, I mean, I guess we might as well talk about it. You got the double bevel and single bevel. I mean, it's just complete horseshit. There's no difference between a single bevel and a double bevel head. Sorry. Other than the single bevel has an inferior edge. It's an unsupported edge. And it's just going to dull faster. So, but anyway, rock on, I guess. But the single bevels have been around forever. And the whole reason they came about is because half these broadheads used to be made in guys' garages. And hell, they don't have the equipment in their garages to do a sophisticated double bevel perfect edge. But anybody can take a rasp and a file and make a single bevel edge. That's why when you go to like third world countries or the jungles in South America, every single machete is a single bevel because they sharpen them on rocks. I mean, that's why they were developed. Yeah. But go find a single bevel knife. You can't. There's a reason for it. So, I mean, the whole basis of judging the quality of a blade, regardless of what the implement is how long it stays sharp, right? I mean, isn't that how you say this is a great knife, stays sharp? I don't have to resharpen it very often. This is a great broadhead, it stays sharp. So why would you use a single bevel that's going to dull faster? And I know they talk about the rotation thing, and that is just, it's such a finite little detail that a single bevel, let's say that it does create rotation. Well, it doesn't create it. Let's say that it'll maintain your arrow's rotation a little bit longer. It's only going to do it maybe 20 or 30%, maybe another half rotation. What difference does that make? And, the theory is that it rotates in the bone and splits the bone. Man, that ain't how it works. If you think of the ratio of the bevel to the broadhead, you're talking about 5%, maybe. It's more like 2 or 3% surface area of the bevel and 97, 98% surface area of the broadhead, the body of it and everything else. If that ratio because you've got to think about it, the bevel is the blade or like a blade on a prop for a boat or airplane propeller, or the wings on a plane that creates rotation. If that ratio would work, if you could only have your blades 2 or 3% of the surface area and the rest of it, and it would still rotate the mass, planes would have 80% fuselage to carry a ton of people and 20% wings. But you look at a wing look at an airplane and it'll tell you right there, the ratio is 90% wing, 10% fuselage or body. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I hate to break it to you, but there's not enough surface area there to create rotation enough to where it would split a bone or do anything like that. The other side of that is let's just say, for argument's sake, that physics don't apply to single bevel broadheads and they do create rotation. Let's say that they've got the magic bean and they create rotation. Why would you want something to rotate through an animal? Because number one, broadheads don't create energy. So if there was something that's creating a screwing or rotating mechanism or force, it has to rob or tax the energy from something else. The only thing that it can rob it or tax it from is the movement of the arrow. So you're taking your energy from your arrow and you're letting something that would rotate it, it's going to have to borrow and tax energy from that to create rotation. So think about driving a nail through a board, and you can, if you're good, you can swing a hammer one time and shoot that nail right through a board. You can take the same exact size nail and make it a screw, and you have to have an external motor to turn it and rotate it multiple times through there. So think of the force that it takes to screw a screw into a board versus driving a nail through. The nail has no resistance and it zips right through. The screw has tons of resistance. So why in God's green earth would you want something that is going to create resistance and tax your arrow of energy to rotate? The good news is it doesn't, so you ain't got to worry about it. you just have a inferior blade. So there's my single bevel rant.
So what
we
about
don't
the
have to talk
idea
about it
behind?
anymore.
So what about the idea behind the single bevel? Creating the wedge to break the bone.
It doesn't create enough rotation to do that. So right. The reason 2-blade heads,
and if it did, it would be taking so much of the energy away from the arrow to do that.
Yes.
That you would essentially be done anyways.
Doesn't make any sense. So the good thing is that it doesn't. What's breaching bone with a single bevel is the same thing that breaches bone on a 2-blade. The 2-blade is the single most efficient way to split bone. If it wasn't, you'd have axes with 3 blades. I mean, how do you split a piece of wood?
Right.
With a single blade. That's how you split them. How's the wedge look? It's a single blade. That's how you split things. It has nothing to do with the rotation. Look, single bevels have been around forever. This isn't something new. I mean, these things have been around forever. This rotation theory and all this crap was dispelled in the 80s. And then it popped back up in the 90s. Right. It was dispelled in the 90s. Now we have YouTube and all these people that are jumping on the bandwagon. And it's funny because like guys that are true engineers that know the science and know that there is no benefit to the single bevel that have broadhead companies, they're making single bevel broadheads and selling them when they know that it's not doing what they say it does. And they word it very delicately to cover their tracks, but they don't say it creates rotation. They say it continues the rotation of the arrow, maybe 20%, maybe. I say not very much at all. Now I'll tell you this. I used to buy.
I'll tell you where.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I used to buy left-hand bevel broadheads because they were always on sale after hunting season. Because they, you sell so many more right-hand bevels than left-hand bevels. So I would wait till after hunting season and I'd buy a bunch of packs of left-hand bevel broadheads on sale. Because when you're shooting a lot of hogs and deer, every year in the South, I mean, you're losing tons of arrows and broadheads constantly. They're just shooting through stuff and you don't find them or whatever. So that's how I would buy them. And they said, well, they're going to unscrew. They don't unscrew because they don't rotate. The only way you're going to have a broadhead unscrew is if you shoot left helical fletchings, and that's the only way a broadhead's going to unscrew. But you can shoot left helical fletchings with a regular two blade, and it'll unscrew. Doesn't have anything to do with the bevel on the blade, and that's the only way you'll ever have your broadheads unscrew is with left helical fletchings. So I'm sure this is melting faces right now, but anyway.
No,
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. So
I'll tell you where my questioning about the double bevel began, because that's what I bought into. I bought into we'll smack a shoulder and it's going to crack through the bone.
You're
and
talking
keep
about
rotating,
single bevel.
and you're going to. I'm sorry, single bevel.
Yeah. Okay.
And you're going to have a screwdriver going through the deer, and oh my gosh, it's going to be incredible. And I bought into it, and I shot a mess of animals with them. I shot them with, cutthroats, and I shot them with the razor heads, and they work. However, I started questioning that theory when a guy that is all about double bevels for the reason of it rotates through the animal.
Single bevels.
When he told me, I'm sorry, single bevels.
Yeah. I just don't want to confuse. I'm not trying to correct you. I don't want to confuse people.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. When he told me, when I said, well, I'm shooting a right helical, so I need a right bevel broadhead. He said, no, it's okay. I'm going to send you left because it won't make that big of a difference anyways. And I said, that's when I started thinking in my mind, okay, if you really truly believe that the broadhead continues to rotate through the animal, then you want my arrow to be flying downrange, spinning right. But when you hit it, you want it to have to correct itself and start spinning left through the animal with the broadhead. It's going to take so much energy away from the arrow. It's impossible. Like, if that's truly is why you buy into a single bevel broadhead, but you think that it's okay that I shoot right helical vanes with a left bevel broadhead, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so I started really diving into this. And that's kind of what got me on these big questions. You know what I mean? So I want to take a step back. A broadhead, go back to your unscrewing theory real quick. Walk me through that one more time. Guys, when it comes to hunting and being outdoors, I believe there's one product that I use more than anything. That's not my bow. That's not my boots. It's not my anything else other than a binocular harness. If I am outside doing anything outdoors, I've got a binocular harness on. Whether I'm shooting, whether I'm hanging tree stands, whether I'm out hiking, it doesn't matter. If I'm outdoors doing just about anything, I've always got my binocular harness. Alaskan Guide Creations does it and does it very, very well. I've been using these now for about 8 years, and I absolutely love them. The new system with all the magnets are really good, really accessible, very customizable. Guys, if you're in the market for a new binocular harness, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to check out Alaskan Guide Creations because they are phenomenal.
Well, the only way that they'll unscrew is if the arrow is spinning left, because you rotate your arrow clockwise to screw your head on, right?
Correct.
So if you have your arrow rotating counterclockwise at its terminal velocity, at its max spin, okay? So it's spinning there. As soon as a broadhead hits a foam target, it's not going to be able to spin at the same rate that it was spinning before impact. So as soon as the arrow broadhead hits, but the arrow behind it is still spinning at max spin rate, and it's spinning counterclockwise, which is how you unscrew your broadheads. That's how broadheads unscrew.
Gotcha.
I refer to it as the single bevel scam. Now, let me say this. If you're going to shoot 2-blade broadheads, or even 2-blade broadheads with bleeders, are single bevel heads not going to work? No, they're going to work great. We're splitting hairs here. They're just not going to maintain their edge as well as a supported double bevel edge. That's really it. There's really they're not like awful heads. They're not horrible. You're not a dum-dum for shooting one. There's a slightly, a very low percentage difference in a small percentage difference in the quality of edge retention. That's all we're discussing. So that's the only difference between that and the exact same head in a double bevel. It's just edge retention. So other than that, they're fine. If you want to know what day 6 is about, this will sum it up for you. It costs about half as much to get a single bevel blade made. Half as much. The guy that grinds our blades begs me to do single bevels because he can do them in half the time. And all the labor in building broadhead blades is putting the edge on it. All that other stuff is easy. It's easy. And they can do it, no effort, no manpower, no nothing. Comes to putting an edge on a broadhead, very labor intensive, lots of manpower, lots of cost there. So that's where the cost is in building blades. He begs me to do single bevels because they can sharpen them in a third of the time that it takes to do a double bevel. So it costs half as much to build a single bevel as it does a double bevel. But we don't sell them. Now, the companies that do sell them and sell double bevels, they sell the single bevels for more. That's what kills me. They sell them for more. They're more expensive and they're half as much to make. And if I was a better business person or didn't have a conscience, we'd make them and we'd sell them for the same price and as we do our double bevels, and we'd print money. But that's not what day 6 is about. It's basically building the things I want, and I'm building extras to sell to others. And I want the very best. And my theory on when it comes to building up my gear as it pertains to, let's just pare it down to my bow, my archery equipment. My theory there is chips make a pile. And by that, what I mean is, if I can increase my penetration by 5% by micro tuning my arrow, getting the perfect spine, perfect arrow flight, and I can increase penetration by 5%, I'm going to take those chips. If I can increase my penetration by 5% by having the most efficient broadhead possible, I'm going to take those 5%. If I can reduce the percentage of arrow failure by 1% by not shooting a lighted knock, I take that chip. And if I can reduce the potential of failure on a drop away rest by shooting a whisker biscuit, everybody laugh all you want, don't care. I'll take that 1%. I want to eliminate all those percentage of chances of failure. And so when you do all that and you add all these things up, it doesn't seem like a lot when you're doing it. And so you take a double bevel versus a single bevel. Let's say it's 1% better. I'll take it. But when you add all that stuff up, it's going to be 20, 25% improvement across the board. Chips make a pile. That's the difference between the guys that you always wonder, how in the world do they consistently kill these animals year after year after year versus the guys that have great stories about the one that got away. And there's a reason that 10% of the hunters fill 90% of the tags. It's because the bulk of those 10% of those guys understand chips make a pile, and they take zero chances. If there's a 1% improvement out there in your kit, they do it. If there's a 1% chance of failure, they don't use it. And that's the difference in a nutshell. And so, yeah, we're splitting hairs with broadheads, but let's say,
but it's the single most important thing you could put consideration to.
Yeah,
single most.
Yeah. Here's the thing: the least important thing in your archery gear is your bow. That is the least important thing. Oh crap! We're on the Bear podcast, aren't we?
No, but you're right. You're
sorry.
right.
I'm sorry, man. I
Go ahead.
I have no filter, but
I've told people this.
Okay.
I've told people this 100 times.
Yeah.
Listen, I've told people this 100 times because Bear makes super budget friendly bows. They also make flagship bows, but I've told people this 100 times. Dude, you've got guys like Chuck Adams killing new world records in the backcountry of Alaska with a bow that costs $600. You don't have to drop all this money in a bow to be able to kill animals. You've got guys like Clay Hayes who are carving bows out of trees and building a string for them and killing animals.
That's right.
You don't have to spend all this time and money on bows. What those guys put more consideration to is the arrow that they're shooting and the broadhead that's on the end of that arrow.
The arrow and broadhead combination, the arrow broadhead combination is the single most important thing. And it's not just what it is, it's how it's flying. So if I had to say one thing that I could not give up, if I had to give up something, the first thing I couldn't give up is arrow flight. Arrow flight is what creates two holes. Way, 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 way more important than what broadhead you've got on the end. So, if I'm looking at my setup and my broadhead, a super sharp, solid two-blade style versus a mechanical, well, that's a huge percentage. I mean, you're looking at maybe you might have a 10, 15, 20% chance of failure on a mechanical where it's 0% chance of failure on a good broadhead, a solid broadhead, one piece. So that's a huge amount of chips that make a good pile. So there's a huge discrepancy there. Most of this stuff is not like the single bevel to double bevel. It's not really measurable. But for a guy like me, I can't go into the field knowing there's a better mousetrap that I could be using. So, but with the discrepancy between, or the delta between the efficiency of a a fixed blade head versus mechanical, that's pretty substantial. But to circle back to what you said, Dylan, you made a really, really good point without knowing you were making it. You were talking about the guys that never shoot their bow, never shoot their broadheads. They buy the broadhead at the store, the mechanical at the store, because they know it's going to file like their field point. What we're talking about is not a one size fits all. What we're talking about, honestly, is for the 10% of your listeners that want to be better and they want to be efficient and they want to be the best they can be. The other 90% of the people you're going to listen to, they're going to say, man, that's neat, but they're still going to just go yank a pack of mechanicals off the package the week before. A package of mechanicals off the rack the week before deer season. I hate to say this, but that's who mechanicals are for, because at the end of the day, arrow flight and accuracy is incredibly important. And for those guys, if they listen to this podcast and say, man, I'm going to buy some of those day 6 heads, but they don't shoot their bow and their bow's not tuned and they screw them on there right before the season, they're not going to hit anywhere near where they're aiming. And they might be a really good shot with their field points. So there is a place in this world for a mechanical head. As I've gotten older, I've come to that realization. Earlier in my life, it was, you should go to jail if you shoot one. I'm not that way anymore. I do understand that there's a time and place for everything. And listen, guys have got to be honest with themselves. You may think that you're the guy that's going to get out there and do the micro tuning and getting everything perfect and shoot enough reps to get your form perfect. But you got to be honest with yourself. If you're really not that guy, you probably better shoot mechanical heads. And look, we don't make and sell mechanical heads, but I think there's a place for them for sure. And I think based on my experience, tracking, a lot of animals over the years, behind guys that have shot them. And, I had a Bavarian mountain hound, tracking dog that we just actually, had to put him down a few months ago. He was 13 years old. We had 10 years of incredible, experience tracking, archery shot animals with him. And, I see what mechanicals do, and I see what they're supposed to do, and I see the good designs and the bad. And so I do have some experience with them. I just don't have any personal experience with them. I've never shot one, not once in my life. So, but I have a lot of time behind a blood trailing, deer shot with them. And so, I've had guys that have hunted with me for 25, 30 years in our camps and stuff. And those guys have always shot mechanicals, and I've never even tried to sell them on our stuff because they don't shoot their bow. So they need to,
Right.
That's what they need to be shooting. So, I don't know if you want to get into the mechanical discussion and about how they work and how they don't, and what I feel is
absolutely
a good design. I don't mind talking about them.
That's one thing. One of your number one piece, if you want to get down to penetration, I want to penetrate the animal the best I can, which that should be the goal for all of us. If you want to get down to penetration, then you have to have an arrow that's flying straight.
Correct.
That's the number one. I mean, that's the number one. You got to check the tune of your bow.
The knock has to be behind the head.
Exactly.
Pretty simple stuff.
Even if you're, and guys, I mean, look at it. Like, if you think about it, I mean, if I come at you with, if I try to stab a pen through a piece of paper and I stab it fast and straight, it's going to go through. But if I come at that half crooked and sideways, it's just going to push the paper out of the way and not go through the paper. You have to have a well-tuned bow with an arrow that's flying straight. I don't care if your broadheads are hitting exactly where you want to hit them with. If your arrow's not flying straight, you're not going to get good penetration. And that's why, last year I was really struggling with, not last year, 3 years ago now, I guess, I was really struggling with my wife's bow. I was really struggling with her getting good penetration and putting down animals. And so I really started taking a deep dive, and I started thinking, well, I need to increase the arrow weight. Well, then I started getting into this arrow weight that was crazy heavy, and I'm like, I can't. She's shooting 47 pounds. She can't have a 550 grain arrow. That's not right. Well, then I started thinking, okay, well, Dylan, and then I started thinking, okay, well, Dylan, you shoot 600 grains out of your recurve, and it's only 43 pounds.
Exactly.
And that bow is generating a whole lot more energy than your stick bow. So why wouldn't you want her shooting 550 grains? Well, then I started thinking, okay, well, I can't put a big old double bevel broadhead on her bow. Those are made for stick bows. And then I thought, wait a second, Dylan. If you want to get maximum penetration out of a stick bow that's not generating as much kinetic energy and force as her bow is, why wouldn't you want to shoot this? And so to answer the question, I said that I want to dive into different species, different setups, different. Why would you not want to? People are like, well, man, I got to get this big old beefy arrow for, if I want to go hunt water buffalo, or if I'm hunting elk, or if I'm hunting. Why wouldn't I want the same penetration and same hard hitting force and same, well-performed arrow on a whitetail? Like, I hear guys all the time, and I've been guilty of it, to say, well, I'm going to shoot the mechanicals on the whitetail, but I'm not going to shoot it on the elk. Why is that? I mean, the whitetail's life is no more valuable or no less valuable than the elk or the pig or the whatever. If I'm shooting at something, every part of my intention should be to kill it as fast and effectively as I can. So if this arrow is going to kill the elk the fastest and most effectively, why would it not kill the whitetail the fastest and most effectively?
Well, you know what I mean? It's a great point. I've never shot a different arrow for different species. I started shooting a traditional bow when I was 21 and pretty much shot it exclusively for 15 years. Still hunt a lot with a stick bow. And I've taken a stick bow to Africa several times. I've killed big stuff with them, buffalo and all kinds of crap. And the benefit that I got from starting to shoot a stick bow at a young age, like 21, 22 years old, is I learned how to properly tune an arrow and understood that you don't have the luxury of velocity with a stick bow. So what you've got to hyper focus on is mass and arrow flight. And then once I started getting incredible performance and results with a stick bow, it never even occurred to me not to just take that arrow and put it on a compound. I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, you're basically taking a perfect killing implement with a heavy, cut on contact, low resistance, perfectly flying arrow. Why not take that off of a 40 horsepower engine and put it on a 200 horsepower engine? Right. Now you can kill Volkswagens. I mean, it's just, there's Katie bar the door. So, so that just made super, super easy sense to me. When I'm setting up youth shooters or female shooters, it's the equivalent of a stick bow. So you don't have the luxury of velocity like, most adult men shooters do. So you have to approach it the same way and focus on mass and arrow flight and low resistance. So you wouldn't want to take the same formula and arrow calculator that you would use for a grown man shooting 70 pounds and use that same calculator to figure out what a 15-year-old or 13-year-old would shoot. It's not a one size fits all. So you can't take dad's arrow and take his expandable and put it on this 300 grain arrow that's traveling at half the speed. It's not going to work. So, for me, mechanicals there's not a place for them in youth and female shooters. They're shooting low poundage. That's why you don't see people shoot mechanicals out of a stick bow. They just don't have the luxury of losing the momentum that you lose in order to open the mechanism that is a mechanical broadhead. The other thing is most of them are not designed efficiently to be low drag, low resistance. They're designed to be high drag, high resistance. I mean, the blades stick straight out, so on and so forth. You have to have a lot of mass and energy behind them and a lot of momentum to carry something like that through. So to me, I mean, that's the deal. Here's the problem. You've got the wife and the kid that's wanting to go shoot the 3D course with dad, and they want their 30, 40, 50, 60 pins. And if you set a youth bow up or a female's bow up to do that, you're not going to be able to set it up to be efficient as a killing machine. It's just not going to work. My boys had one pin on their bow. They shot 20 and in, and no problem when they were kids. You start putting multiple pins and sliders and all this ultralight stuff on there and tell them they can shoot at 30 and 40. You're creating a non-hunter because they're going to have bad experiences and they're going to come away with a lot of heartache. And they're not going to continue to do it. So it's imposed limitations, and that bleeds over, Dylan, into grown men that have short draw lengths and don't pull a lot of weight. We deal with them every day. Had a guy last week that had a 25-inch draw. He was pulling 60 pounds, and he wanted to be able to go shoot tack, but he also wanted to build a hunting arrow. And I just said, bud, it's just, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear just to sell you something. I'm going to tell you the truth. You'll probably go somewhere else. That's okay. But at least I know I told you the truth. If you're shooting a short draw length, you've reduced that power stroke on that compound bow substantially. And so you could take a guy with a 30-inch draw and he could shoot the same exact arrow at the same mass, same speed at 50 pounds that a guy with a 27 or 25-inch draw at 60 pounds would shoot. because you've just reduced that power stroke or that cycle on the bow. So for guys that are listening to this that have short draw lengths, you have to have self-imposed limitations. It's how God made you. There's nothing you can do about it. And you know, if you want to be a successful ethical bow hunter, you need to set your bow up for that. If it's more important to have a jersey on and wear bedazzled jeans and go shoot 3D shoots, set your bow up for that. But you can't have both. It doesn't go both ways. So that's a big problem that we face daily at our company, is getting guys away from what, you know, social media shows them as the cool thing and what they should be doing versus what they really need to do to be successful hunters. And look, there's a big difference in hunters and guys that like to hunt. That's two different demographics. There are real hunters out there, and there are guys that like to hunt. And the guys that live it, bleed it, are just totally consumed with it, that are hunters. There's no decision for them. They want the most efficient system to kill. The other guys, they're just out there to goof off and have fun. And it's both of those are great, but it's just, you know, that's not what we do.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, it's rough to tell people, but you're absolutely right. Like, that's a hard thing to tell people. But you're 100% right. But when you just think about things simply, and when you think about, okay, well, if, you know, I'm going to do this because it's best for my wife at a low poundage, a low draw weight, a short draw. But I'm going to do this for me. Like, yes, I can get away with shooting a light arrow with mechanicals that my wife cannot get away with. However, if that's best for a bow generating X amount of kinetic energy, why wouldn't I want it on my bow that's generating 2 times the kinetic energy?
Exactly.
Because it's just going to be that much better. Why hinder yourself? And dude, I honestly had no idea we were this much of kindred spirits, because when you know, taking a step back to your statement about whisker biscuits, amen, brother. Like, dude, I'm right there with you.
There's nothing better.
I remember
if you're a hunter, there's nothing better for arrow containment. If you spend any time on the ground, spot and stalk, there is nothing better. And the measurable difference between accuracy and performance, between that and a drop away rest, is really not measurable out to 70, 80 yards. It's beyond that is where you can start seeing a slight, very slight measurable difference. And that harkens back to, are you going to set your bow up for 3D shoots? Or are you going to set them up for ethical hunting? So, yeah, I mean, there's just nothing better. I get made fun of all the time about my whisker biscuits. And I'm just like, just walk in the basement, man. Just go down there.
Yeah, absolutely.
You tell me what works and what doesn't. But here's one thing I'll say that you mentioned that is a great point as well, that I think would be beneficial for people to hear is, you know, we talked about shooting the same arrow for everything. And if I hear this 100 times a week, I don't hear it once. I mean, it's like, I'm only shooting whitetails. I'm from New York, or I'm from Pennsylvania, interstate, eastern state here. I only shoot whitetails. So I don't need the heavy arrow and this, you know, all that. I don't need that. And what I tell them is like, hey man, you're talking to a guy that has shot a lot of whitetails. In Alabama, my whole life, you could shoot 2 deer a day for 120 days. They just said, let her rip. And you could shoot hogs year round, and we're haired over with them down there. So, to me, it is equally as important, if not more important, to shoot a heavy, efficient setup on whitetails than some of the other Western big game stuff. And I'll tell you why. I've shot very few whitetails in my life that were not in full chaotic spin mode when the arrow hit them. And it's hard for people to visualize the difference in shooting a target and a live animal. But when it comes to whitetails, 99% of the time, the animal is in movement when the arrow takes place. And so what's happening there is with the animal being in a state of movement upon impact, it's the equivalent to your arrow flying at an angle. Because what happens is if you have bad arrow flight, your arrow's flying at an angle and the knock is not behind the head and you're not getting the benefit of all the energy. It's not focused in that one point. When an animal like a whitetail is moving, as soon as the broadhead enters that animal and the animal is dropping and spinning away, it's pulling the broadhead out of the arrow's path. And so as that broadhead is moving left, right, up or down out of its path, it's losing and reducing momentum. So it's almost more important to have a heavy, low resistance setup on a whitetail because they're in such a high state of movement upon impact. And if you've ever watched boxing, I grew up boxing. I boxed my entire life. And, you get hit a lot. But when you see it coming and you can move with the punch and reduce its effectiveness, where you get your butt folded up is when you don't see it coming. And you're not moving and it hits you flush dead on and you get all the mass and energy of that punch. You're done. You're frogged out. It's over. Same way with an arrow hitting an animal. That animal is not doing anything but dodging that punch. It's moving and spinning and it's moving and it's pulling all that energy away from that arrow upon impact. Nobody talks about that stuff. And it's this hyper focus on how it's going to shoot into a target, and it's the least most representative thing that you're going to experience hunting is shooting into a fixed target. So for me, whitetails, it's more important to have super heavy, low drag, high efficiency arrows because of that. So if you think about it in simple math, I always try to make these things simple for people to understand. Because there's not a lot of people out there that trust the science anymore after the last 3 years. So I try to keep it in dumb terms like guys like me can understand. If your arrow is 600 grains, which I don't shoot a 600 grain arrow, by the way, I don't think you have to be that heavy. But let's just say for argument's sake, if your arrow is 600 grains and you hit a deer at 30 yards and it's in full convulsion, full spin, by the time that arrow starts going through the animal and gets to the vitals, you have the equivalent of shooting a 300 grain arrow because the head is out of the path of travel and your momentum is diminishing just as that animal moves, the momentum calculation is just, that value is just plummeting. So if you're shooting a 300 grain arrow and you hit that deer and he's spinning and it moves the head out of the way, and once it gets to the vitals, now you have the equivalent of a 150 grain arrow. Does that make sense? That was a very dumb way, simple way but it's something I think people can understand. So the benefit for whitetails with shooting heavy arrows is that you still have a lot of mass and a lot of momentum value as it's going through the animal because it's diminishing at the same rate, but you still have a higher value. So,
guys, if you run any kind of supplement for your deer, which you absolutely should, there are things that deer need. And I have found that when I run supplements for my deer, it keeps them on my property so they don't go wandering off onto other properties looking for that thing that they're needing. And so I have just dove fully into running minerals and protein for my deer all year long. Buck Bourbon does supplements and attractants really, really well. Whether you're looking for a long-range attractant like the 110 proof, or whether you're looking for a feed that you can run all year long in a feeder or even just on the ground in their barrel proof, Buck Bourbon has what you need. I can tell you story after story of going onto a new 500-acre piece, dumping out some long-range attractant, and deer just coming into it. Guys, it will make a difference in the way that you see your deer come in. So, guys, I would highly encourage you to check out Buck Bourbon. You can use code HUNTING101 in all caps to get 15% off. But I would just encourage you, no matter what, to start running some sort of supplement for your deer. It'll have a happier, healthy herd. You'll keep them on your property more, and you can better manage those deer. Guys, go check out Buck Bourbon. All right. So you mentioned one word there. You said the word diminishing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to open up. I'm going to open up a massive can of worms for you here.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, but I think I need to do it. So we talked about, you know, giving yourself the best setup. Heavy arrows are on the rage right now. You know, you can give thanks to guys like the Ranch Fairy and the Hunting Public and those guys. However, I think that some people are going too heavy.
Yeah, it's the point of diminishing return.
This does exactly. So that at what point do you get to that point of diminishing returns? At what point are you stacking up so much kinetic energy that you would never need, and you're losing so much valuable speed that, you know, I mean, you have to have.
Sure. So
I mean, sure, I can stack 1,000-pound arrow together and shoot it, but you know, it takes 4 seconds to get there at 60 yards. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but you know, at what point are you just you're reaching that point of diminishing returns? And well, I'll ask another question on weight after that. So at what point are you getting just too much?
So this is not a super easy question to answer, but
it's not.
No, it's not. But I think I can use an analogy that'll put it in simple terms for people.
Yeah.
So these bows are designed to be max efficiency at 8 grains per pound. Okay. So if you shoot a 70-pound bow, a 560 grain arrow on a 30-inch draw is max efficiency. Okay. And when I say max efficiency, this is what I'm talking about. So let's think about your bow as an engine. All right. And let's say that engine is 100 horsepower. And if it was 100 horsepower and you wanted to use 8 grains per horsepower to be max efficiency, you'd shoot an 800 grain arrow. Okay. But let's say that you don't want to do that and you want to shoot a lighter, faster arrow and you shoot a 500 grain arrow. With 100 horsepower, what you're doing is you're putting 70%, you're putting 70 horsepower into the arrow, but the arrow's too light. So 30%, let's say you're trying to put 100 horsepower into the arrow, but the arrow's too light. It can't receive it all. It's too light. So it's putting 30 horsepower back into the bow in the form of vibration and noise. Okay. So it's like dry firing your bow. But if you beef it up to the proper weight to where it's what the arrow, the engine, your bow is an engine, it's what the engine is designed to do at max efficiency. What you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to accomplish all that 100 horsepower into that arrow and trying to reduce the amount of too much or too little horsepower into that. So the analogy is that anybody that's ever had like it's like the gears are the rear end on your car. Okay. So if you have too high of a gear, it's going to be, too tall of a gear. It's going to never get up to, let's say, your proper RPM. So it's going to be sluggish and slow and to barely take off. If you have too low of a gear, it's going to over rev your engine and go past that perfect sweet spot. So let's say that the engine on a boat or a car or anything like that is 5,000 horsepower. What you're trying to do with the prop on that boat engine or the gear on that car is you're trying to get it to where it's going to max out at 5,000 horsepower because that's where it's delivering if you have all that energy is getting delivered right there. And so a bow is the exact same thing. Most people are shooting too light of an arrow. So they're putting 80% of the energy in their arrow and then 20% is rolling back into the bow in the form of vibration noise because the light arrow can't absorb all the horsepower. So the thing is that it's very simple concept to understand. So let's say that you're shooting a 400 grain arrow and it's shooting 300 feet per second and you're happy as a clam, but you're not getting good penetration because it's light. So you bump up to a 500 grain arrow, right? So make sure I get my math right here, but So that's a 25% increase in mass. So if the bow was already operating at maximum efficiency, you would have a 25% decrease in speed, right? If you've increased your mass 25%, the speed should go down if it was already max efficiency. But you're shooting 300 feet per second, right?
Right.
So if you added 25% of mass, your bow should drop to 225, but it doesn't. Most of the time when you have a bow that's shooting, say, 300 feet per second, these are just averages, and they go up 25% in mass, they drop down to like, say, 275, 270. Let's just say 270, okay? That's a 10% reduction in speed. So it automatically tells you that your bow was not operating at max efficiency. If it was, the velocity shed, the velocity loss with your bow would be commensurate with the mass gain, but it's not. So if you're only losing 10% by going up 25%, you are already putting tons of energy back into your bow. So that is kind of a point of diminishing return. Now, the pendulum swings the opposite way when you go too heavy. When you get too heavy, you're bogging the bow down, and you're starting to, like, the rate that you lose speed goes way, way down exponentially. So the other thing is that there's a trade-off, as far as the diminishing return when it comes to increasing your arrow mass. You're getting the benefit of arrow mass, but what you're losing is velocity. Well, everybody says, all the heavy arrow guys say velocity is not important. It really isn't, except for one thing, and that is your max point blank range. That's your high and low. Okay, so if your pin is dead, say your 20 pin is dead on, and your 30 pin is say 8-inch drop, and then at 40, let's say it's 16. I'm just throwing out round numbers, okay? And you go from a 500 grain arrow to a 600 grain arrow. Now you've got, say, a 16-inch drop and a 32-inch drop, which is not that much, but you see what I'm saying? As you start going heavy, right, your trajectory just drops incredibly fast. So people say, well, why is that important? If I have a pin for that, and I know the range, it shouldn't matter. The problem is that I never use my rangefinder. When I use them, it usually screws up the opportunity to kill what I'm trying to kill. In the real world, you have split seconds to make decisions, gather all the information you have, and make a decision. And so I see guys screw themselves constantly messing with that rangefinder over and over and over and over. You don't have the luxury in the real world to do that. You've basically got to establish your wire, establish your range. I say, I know that this zone is 30 and in. I know that zone's 30 to 40. I know that. And what I'm trying to do is find that delicate balance between a good mass on my arrow for maximum efficiency of my bow and penetration, but also minimize that max point blank range, or that gap, between distances between yardages. Because for me, I've killed a lot of animals in my life that I know what the range is within 5 yards, but I don't know exactly what it is. And if you're shooting a 650 grain arrow, 5 yards is a miss. And that's important. The other side of that is let's say you are using your rangefinder and you hit a bush in front of it, and you think that the elk is at 40, but he's actually at 43 because you hit the bush in front of it unknowingly. You want to have forgiveness. And so you hear me say this a lot: one size fits all doesn't apply to bow hunting. It's a delicate balance of everything. And what you're trying to do, chips make a pile for me. I'm trying to figure out what's the most efficient system is that's going to have the least amount of negative effects on my success. And that's with regards to arrow and mass. That is making sure I have proper mass for efficiency and good penetration, but also that balance of reducing the chances of misjudging yardage and hitting high or low. I'll tell you right now, I bet you 75% of lost animals with a bow are high shots. I would put big money on that. There's so much more goodies in the lower third than there are in the upper third. And from what I've seen over the years, most animals are hit high and they're lost. So yardage matters, having the range right matters. And listen, if you have the luxury and time of having a super calm animal that you can bang the laser off of him and get perfect yardage, that's great. But that ain't the real world, man. I mean, they come bowling past you on a buck comes bowling past you on a doe. Man, you got to do a lot of math super fast, and you got to be able to react and kill him. Same thing with a bull. People envision, elk hunting like they picture them grazing in meadows like cows. That ain't how it works, man. They're usually, when they decide to move, they move. Like they walk at the rate we trot. And so the yardage that bull is either gaining or closing just by his natural walk is substantial. And you have a second to be able to find a gap and kill him. And you've got to do a lot of guesswork. And so you want something that's a little more forgiving there. And I know that's a little off the rails on broadhead discussion, but man, I think stuff like that's super important because it's just not what people are talking about. They're just focusing on.
Oh, absolutely.
I have so many guys that are focused on like what steel, what metal, what bevel angle our things are sharpened at, or, will they hold up to a concrete, basement wall? I mean, they're focusing on the things that just dadgum sure don't matter. And it's just what people are getting kind of indoctrinated in, is just focusing on these hyper details when they don't have the macro details even in place yet. They have zero foundation. They're just skipping high school and going straight to a doctorate degree. And you got to learn the foundational stuff first. So anyway,
you're absolutely right, man. Absolutely right. And that's why I wanted you here, man. Again, I've heard you talk, and I know you value a lot of the same things I value. And so, okay. This was my last road to go down. And then I want to just kind of recap your perfect picture scenario as far as, what you would look at for a broadhead arrow combination, everything.
Sure.
What's the difference in stacking the weight? Well, okay. So we went over the weight of the arrow. And I don't want this to be an arrow podcast necessarily, so let's keep it broadhead and inserts, outserts specific.
Sure.
Why would a guy, say I want 300 grains out front total? What's the main differences in stacking 150 in the broadhead and 150 in the insert, or 200 in the broadhead, 100 in the insert, or, Lord, 250 and 50? I mean, does it matter where the weight is between broadhead and insert?
No. So the reason that we offer different materials is for different weights. For day 6, it has very little to do with structural when it comes to arrow components, as it does mass. And so the different alloys have different densities, and it's a super easy way for us to achieve different weights, say 50, 75, and 100 for aluminum, titanium, stainless steel, respectively. So that's why we do that. Super easy way to get different weights. So if a guy wants to buy a 125 head, but he wants to have, 250 up front, he can do a combination of the 125 head and a 125 grain component. As far as I'm not sure what you're exactly asking me, but point weight is point weight. And for the most part, it's combined weight is really your point weight is what it is. It doesn't matter how it's distributed. For us, we have tons of questions about, these are all the hobbyist metallurgists that we deal with daily, that want to know the differences between the materials with regards to our components. We do it for weight because we have incredibly strong arrows, and the components are machined to 1,000th tolerance of the arrows. And so when they bond together with epoxy, which by the way, 50% of a carbon arrow is epoxy, just so you know. So when you bond them together, you have a monolithic one-piece end that adds up all the structural values of the insert, the shaft wall, and the collar. So all of that is the sum of all parts to create the structural integrity for the end. When you have how arrows are traditionally made, they're very thin wall. They use very little material. When you have that, and then you add a structural component to the end, like an insert-outsert system, it really doesn't benefit you that much other than mushrooming, keeping the point from driving into the arrow and mushrooming it out. Other than that, there's really no structural benefit, because what you've done is created a hinge point. You've created a super strong structure at the end of your arrow that is, say, an inch and a half long, but right behind it, it goes from super, super strong to super, super weak thin wall shaft. It's just going to break right there behind it every time. You have to bridge this stuff out. And so the way we do it is we want to make sure we have structural integrity value in the shaft that's equal to like an aluminum collar. We don't want it to be bulletproof for the first inch and a half and then just break right there and have no value. So that's kind of how we do that. As far as, I don't know if you're asking me about FOC. If you are,
yeah.
I mean, I can tell you that FOC is a real thing when it comes to penetration, when it comes to, before I continue this, listen to everything I'm about to say. Don't just take the clip and say FOC is a real thing and makes a difference in penetration. It would if we could build arrows with 50, 60, 70, 80% FOC, like a dart, like on a dartboard, okay? We can't. We don't have the technology. We don't have it. So when guys are obsessing over their arrow build and point weight to get over a certain percentage FOC, say between 10 and 20, it's not measurable. It's just not measurable. There's no way you can measure the difference that it's going to make. Even at 30%, it's not measurable. This is another thing that falls into that single bevel scam category. It's talked about too much. It is based on sound theory, but the application as it applies to archery is not sound. It's not measurable. If you could have a single bevel broadhead that had 80% bevel, 20% body, they'd rotate like crap. Can't do it. If you had an arrow that you could build that had 80% FOC, yeah, it'd be fantastic. Because you wouldn't have to worry about arrow flight as much. So that's that. So don't worry about FOC. You got so much other crap to worry about. That just ain't one of them. So as far as the overall point weight goes, it's just it's just kind of what you want. The important thing to take away here, though, is what we run into is guys don't tell us what broadhead they're shooting, and they order arrows, and they order a 300 spine arrow with a 100 grain centric component. And if they were shooting a 100 grain head, at a 70 pound bow, 27 inch draw, 28 inch draw, whatever, it would tune out right and the spine would be perfect. But if we don't know and somebody just jumps on and orders, we have no idea what they're doing, but they've got a 200 grain head that they're going to put on there. What happens is when you add the point weight, it weakens the spine. It makes it flex more. And so you get terrible arrow flight and it's a nightmare to tune because you don't have the right spine. So you can't just arbitrarily change point weight in and out. The point weight, combined point weight, broadhead and component of an arrow is an integral part of determining its dynamic spine and making sure you have the proper size shaft and spine of how it's going to react to the bow when the energy is delivered. You can't just change it around because a 300, when you increase the point weight by 100 grains, is not a 300 anymore. Its dynamic spine may be the equivalent of a 350, 400. You don't know.
Right.
So you have to bump up in spine. That's where we see people just get wrapped around the axle and really get in a bind, is they come off listening to the Ranch Fairy stuff and they think, man, if I put 300 up front, it'll cure cancer. And so, it's not that simple. There's a lot that goes into it. Now, in his defense, I will say that he has certainly over the last year or so that I've heard him talk, he has tried to unwind, a lot of that and explain it to people that, hey, you can't just pile all this weight on the front. The spine has to go with it. You have to increase spine as you increase this. And, he's acknowledged that, hey, arrow flight's way more important than anything else. So, I will say that the message is getting a little clearer, but it's still pretty muddy water.
Right. So to kind of recap, to kind of, just take a step back and go back over, your number one, if you were to shoot the perfect broadhead, and again, I don't want to make this species specific because both of us have already said, like, if I'm going to shoot one head for elk, that's what I want to shoot for deer as well. Mm-hmm. Paint me that picture of just the perfect broadhead build for you.
Well, so it's pretty simple for me. I like the smaller heads with bleeders because accuracy is so incredibly important in archery hunting. And when you get into the arrow, well, I wouldn't say that. When you get into the broadhead world of the broadhead sector of the industry, it kind of gets glossed over a little bit when it comes to fixed blades. They focus on a lot of other things. And so for me, accuracy is incredibly important. So I want to use the biggest head that I can use and shoot accurately in hunting situations. So for instance, we have two 125s. We have a standard Evo 125 that's 1 1/16 inch wide, smaller compact head. And then we have the Evo X, which is 1 1/4 inch wide, a little bit longer, a lot more surface area. If I'm at the range or shooting in my yard, I can focus on my shot. I can focus on my grip, my feet, everything's perfectly balanced, and I can execute a good shot, and I can shoot those two heads side by side out to about 50. And it's great. But in hunting situations, you don't have the luxury of taking that perfect form shot. And so you're looking for something that's going to be more forgiving in the field, not on the range. And so the only reason I shoot the Evo X, and the only reason I even designed it, for me, it's a 30 in head. It's basically a tree stand head for me. I love shooting whitetails with it because it's a big head and they're moving, and every little bit counts when they're moving those vitals out of the way. The other thing that I love the wider head for, again, it's a 30 in head for me in hunting situations, and it's a tree stand situation, is bears. Like we talked about before, bears are hard to get good blood on the ground, and the bigger the hole, the better. And that's basically what I designed that head for, is shooting whitetails close and shooting bears close. If I was, there's some guys that I know, and like Dakota, that's our GM, you could put 4 different style 125s in his quiver and he's going to stack them as far as you want him to shoot them. He's one of those guys that has shot so much, and he's so consistent that he can execute a perfect shot, even in hunting situations. I'm a normal human. I'm not that guy. I can't do that, and most people can't. So I err on the side again of stacking the percentages high in my favor for least amount of failure, which is a smaller head, more forgiving when I torque the bow, or if I've got my left foot, a foot higher than my right foot because I'm standing on the side of the mountain. So that's what I do is I set my bow up real forgiving. I know we're not talking about bows, but man, there's no reason to not shoot a longer axle to axle bow. Yeah, they might be 1 or 2 feet per second slower. Who cares? And there's so much more forgiving in the field. Knock pinch is such a big factor when it comes to arrow flight and getting an arrow off the string consistently and getting good flight. And that longer axle bow is just so much more forgiving. There's a reason that all your target archers are shooting 35, 36 inch and longer bows. They're shooting 38s and stuff like that because it's forgiving. So for me, people are like, oh, that's not a good tree stand bow. But look, if a bow is 4 inches longer than what you got, that means that it's 2 inches longer on the bottom side. If that 2 inches is going to make a difference in a tree stand, I don't know what you're doing wrong, but you got a lot more ground to cover before you hit your stand with your bow. So it's not going to make a difference. Where it is going to make a difference with a longer axle bow is when you're having to twist around and shoot a deer behind the tree, or you're having to, shoot on your offhand side. I mean, I've had my toe hooked around trees trying to keep from falling out. That longer axle bow is going to be more forgiving. You're not going to execute a perfect shot, but that bow is not going to amplify the arrows in your shooting form like a shorter axle bow will. So that's kind of my rant. Now, if you're drawing 26, 27 inches, no, you don't need a 33-inch bow. A 30-inch bow is plenty long enough. But if you're average, draw length 28, 29, 30, man, shoot the longer bows because it doesn't matter how pretty it is on the range. It matters where the arrow hits when you're in the field, to me.
Yeah. So I will be, I say all that to say I kind of deep dove. I've booked a lot of Western hunts this year. And so I really just kind of, those situations that I talked about earlier in the podcast really made me look at broadhead choice and look at total arrow build and, reconsider some things. So out of my compound, I'm going to be shooting an Evo 100 grain. And out of my recurve, I'm going to be shooting an Evo X 150 grain. Because out of the recurve, I'm shooting obviously a lot closer distances. So I'm going to shoot that bigger broadhead. Now with the compound, I want to be able to shoot, a lot further distances. So I'm going to shoot the smaller broadhead, in the Evo rather than the X. But guys, that's what I'm going to be running. I'm not going to say I'm going to run that for elk and then switch back to an expandable for whitetails, or back to a single bevel for this or a double bevel. That's what I'm pretty much going to be running exclusively. Because out of everything that I've looked at, read about, studied, experienced with other heads, that's the best for me. And I actually stumbled upon another broadhead that I thought was going to be the best fit. And basically it was a single bevel with a bleeder, and it was a single bevel with a single bevel bleeder. And even my experiences just shooting that into the target, I wasn't super happy with. So decided to go to the double bevel with a bleeder, and that's where I landed on the Evo. So guys, I hope you learned something. If you didn't learn something from this, then you're crippled too high for crutches. I'll just say that. If you can't take something of value from what Bryan said, and improve your arrow setup or your broadhead setup, then I don't know, because he shared a lot of valuable information. Guys, I am a big believer in custom built aftermarket strings. Basically, the moment I pull my bow out of the box, whether it's a new compound, a new recurve, a new longbow, I'm going to be putting a custom built aftermarket string on that bow. At Dominant Strands, they're going to be using high quality fibers from BCY, like a low wax 452X. The low wax content and the special way that they pre-stress and pre-stretch those strings and cables make for a very, very stable set of strings. They're going to last longer and they're going to shoot better. There's going to be very little peep rotation. There's going to be very little stretch over time. You are going to be a lot happier in the long term. You're just going to have a lot better shooting experience when you upgrade those strings to an aftermarket custom built set of strings. Plus, you can customize them any way you want. Now, I'm also a huge believer in custom built strings for a longbow or recurve. Why? Because coming from the factory, they're not going to be using the highest quality materials. They're not going to be pre-stretching those strings over long periods of time. Whereas, again, if I call up Dominant Strands, they're going to build the best set of strings for that bow. I'm going to walk them through what I want out of that string, what I want out of that bow, and they're going to build a set of strings exactly to spec out of the best materials for that bow. Guys, a custom set, the best string you could ever buy for your recurve or longbow, is going to cost you about $30. That is the most bang for your buck that you can get when upgrading your longbow or recurve. You're going to get an incredible shooting experience upgrade for just $30. So I encourage everybody, the moment that recurve or longbow comes out of the box, upgrade it to a custom built string. Guys, the people over at Dominant Strands, they are unmatched when it comes to their customer service. You're going to call them up. You're going to talk to your string builder, the guy that's going to be building your strings. He's going to ask you what you're looking to get out of the bow. He's going to ask you about your bow. He's going to ask you about your nocks. He's going to ask you everything about your bow setup so he can build you the best set of strings for your bow. Guys, I would highly encourage everybody, no matter the bow, no matter the manufacturer, to consider upgrading your strings to a nice set of custom-built aftermarket strings. My boys over at Dominant Strands, they do it, and they do it very, very well. Their turnaround time is incredible. Their attention to detail is unmatched. Guys, give them a call for your next set of strings, and I promise you, you will be happy. And so, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Guys, go check out Day 6 Gear. I think I've landed on their broadheads for being, in my opinion, one of the best options that you could find. So go check out Day 6. Guys, thank you for listening. Y'all have a fantastic day and a great week.